Hello and welcome back to the channel today. We got Dr. Nee with us today, actually. Me and Dr. Nee did a video with Carrie recently, and I put a post in my community tab, so please check that out. That was an amazing video. Dr. Nee is here to join us today to hopefully clarify some of the things from the Dr. Professor Seyfried video, just a little bit, not in too much depth, of course, but just kind of try to simplify everything that we learned in that video because that was a very complex video. Dr. Nee has been fighting cancer, and I'll let her tell her story, but she's been at this battle for 8 years of advanced stage cancer. So we'll let her introduce herself and kind of talk about her battle a little bit. But she being a doctor has gone in deep on all kinds of different metabolic treatments and all kinds of really cool things that I'm really excited to hear more about. She's if it's out there or something that you can do for cancer, she's probably read the book and tried it. So it's quite amazing. So towards the end, we're definitely going to get into that and some really neat ideas on things that you guys can try, and she can share her experiences. I mean, she's been doing this for 8 years, and her experience as a doctor has allowed her to learn everything you need to know. So, Dr. Nee, if you want to just introduce yourself and give us a good little history of what brought you to this point.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, and it's always nice to talk with you. So, yes, I have had a very rare type of sarcoma called alveolar soft part sarcoma, and I was diagnosed 8 years ago, like you said. It was stage 4 pretty much off the bat, and it's pretty common with my type of cancer to be at stage 4 because it grows slowly, but you it spreads very quickly early on. So most of us will have stage 4 at the start. I had a mass in my right gluteus muscle, which I thought was just a muscle knot or something else, and it grew for 3 years until I finally got it checked out. By the time I got it checked out, the ultrasound showed all of the features that a cancerous tumor has, which is like the blood vessel growth, and it had like 5 blood vessels feeding it. So they ended up biopsying it. We got an MRI first and then biopsied it. Turned out to be that rare type of sarcoma. Sarcoma is a little bit different than your regular carcinomas, like your type, because it's derived from the soft tissue and blood vessels, and they're very rare. They happen only about 1% of all cases of cancer, and there's about 70 subtypes or so. My subtype makes up 0.1% of that. So it was 80 people in in the United States get it per year. So because it's so rare, there was not really any good treatment for it. They said chemo and radiation is pretty ineffective because of the slow growing nature of the cancer. So all they had really to offer me was kind of experimental treatments, which included this targeted treatment called a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, and it blocks all of the growth factors like the blood vessel growth, like VEGF and angiogenesis. And then the other treatment that came out, actually, I was diagnosed right when the immunotherapy drugs kind of became approved and used more widely. And so that became an option as well. So I started off with the targeted treatments, and it kept the cancer stable. It didn't shrink anything. I had lung metastasis at that time, about 15 nodules, and it kept it at bay. You know, I was good for a couple of years, had a lot of very horrible side effects, and my quality of life was pretty crappy at that point. But I stuck with it, and because it was working, and I even decided to get a surrogate and had my twin babies that way because the cancer was stable. However, shortly after that, this was about 3 years in, I started to have back pain, and I thought it was just from me being in the ICU with the kids and not sleeping on my own bed. But when I came home and I got my scans, it turned out that I had bone metastasis in my lumbar spine. They saw another one in my manubrium. They biopsied that, and it turned out to be more metastatic disease. So at this point, obviously, the treatment that I was on was no longer working, and that's pretty common where you develop resistance to it. So we had to change treatments. And so this was when my oncologist put me on the new immunotherapy drug. This did not work. It sped up my growth, and me coming off of the previous treatment, I think caused some rebound growth as well. And so I developed more numerous metastases all over my spine, in my ribs, in some areas of my skull. So it was all in my bones. And then the lung metastases were growing. And they haven't grown for a while, but they were getting up to 2 centimeters in size. And before that, they were all like maybe 5, 6 millimeters. So this happened over the course of a year or two, where it just continued to progress. He took me off of the immunotherapy for a little bit and put me back on a different drug that was similar to the previous one that I was on. And it slowed down the growth some, but it was still steadily growing. And I developed some pretty horrible immune reactions that landed me into the hospital for 5 days, which was another reason why he took me off the immunotherapy. I had radiation to control some of the bone metastases, and I was put on steroids and everything to calm down my immune system. So I was off the immunotherapy for probably about a year while the cancer was progressing. And at this point, we moved from New York to California. And that was when I decided that the conventional stuff I was doing and the standard of care was not working. I have 4-month-old babies to take care of, and I was in such horrible shape that I couldn't even take care of them. I couldn't bend over. I was in so much pain. I was not able to walk, pick them up. I was just in bed, and I was still trying to work. But thankfully, I was on maternity leave for these 4 months, and I definitely could not have worked at that time. Um, so that whole situation just really woke me up. I don't know what it was, but it was just like that stage where things were getting serious, and I really felt like death was near. And that freaked me out. And so I kind of went into this frantic search for a better solution. And that was when I started reading my first book by Dr. Ian Goller. It's super old. It's called You Can Conquer Cancer. I don't know what made me buy it, but the guy had osteosarcoma, and he was a doctor. So I guess maybe that's why I picked it. But he essentially healed himself using meditation and diet and lifestyle changes, supplements, no, a bunch of different things to basically reverse his disease. And I thought that that was incredible, because he had, what, I think 6 weeks they gave him to live, and he turned all of this around, and he was still good 30 years later, and so after I read that book, I had a lot of hope. I was like, wow, there must be a lot more to this, because whatever I'm doing is not working, and this is the only option that they have for me. So let me try some of these things out and see what it does. And so that kind of led me down the whole rabbit hole of holistic healing, alternative healing. And I still stuck with the treatment, and I still was doing standard of care, but I incorporated so many things into my healing protocol. And I think that that has really helped me survive to this day.
Absolutely has helped you survive to this day. Well, like basically what you're saying is there was very limited treatment options available for you. There's a little bit of radiation here or there, a little bit of there was the first treatment to block that one thing, and then some
Mhm.
immune therapy. But immunotherapy really only works in rare cases. It sounds like, from what I'm now learning, it sounds like there's a lot more people. They just take it and nothing happens, like 60%, and then there's even a risk of the cancer actually ballooning and becoming more aggressive from immune
Mhm.
therapy. That's a risk. And then there's the risk of it working too well and poisoning your body. So it sounds like to me that even the immunotherapy really isn't a sufficient long-term solution. which is really a surprise to me because I had a lot of hope in immunotherapy when they first diagnosed me. They pumped it up to be this miracle drug. So,
Yeah, no, and then, and it is a miracle drug for some people, especially people with melanoma. They've like incredibly has extended their
mm,
life because melanoma used to be a death sentence. And so many stage 4 melanoma patients have responded and gone into complete remission, and it's long lasting, and they get off of it, it still works. So so it's definitely can be a miracle drug, but unfortunately it just doesn't work for a lot of people. And they're studying it and seeing what may help to make it work better, but right now we just don't know.
yeah. So what that means from there is that you got to really go down the path of figuring out what works best. And you're a big fan of Professor Seyfried, from what I understand. Is that true?
Yes, yes, definitely. Because my rabbit hole kind of led me down the whole, metabolic theory for cancer, because a lot of us, we know the somatic theory, which is what the conventional oncologists basically, it's been kind of what they're using in terms of treatment. So they're targeting genes, and they think that it's the mutations in the genes which cause cancer, because you have the nucleus and then you have the cytoplasm, and the mitochondria is in the cytoplasm, right? And so the metabolic theory basically talks about it's kind of like which one came first. Is it the mutation in the nucleus that then caused all of these things that happen downstream to cause cancer, or is it the environment or the cytoplasm things that happen that trigger the then mutations that happen afterwards? So things like oxidative stress, and that on the mitochondria can then make the nucleus develop all of these genetic mutations and things like that. So the metabolic theory, I think, explains cancer much better, and they've done experiments to see where they actually take the cancer cells out and then put it in an environment where there's normal, environments for it, to see if it would grow, and it doesn't grow, right? So if it really was the genes in the nucleus, then if you put it into another cell, then technically it should create the cancer, but then it doesn't, so there's a lot more to that. So that led me down the whole metabolic pathway, and I read Dr. Nasha Winter's book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and then there's Jane McClelland, who also, basically talks about how she devised her own protocol using repurposed drugs and supplements and diet lifestyle changes to heal actually three cancers. She had three different types of cancers. So she's like, really gone deep into that. And so that's kind of where I found all of this stuff, to try to take different supplements, and just only recently added some repurposed drugs to my protocol, because before that, the diet and the lifestyle changes that I made really worked, and I didn't really need more than that at the time. But since the past 2 years, things have been a little bit more crazy and aggressive for me, and I think that just has to do with how long I've had the cancer and all of the different treatments that I've been on that really, and then some setbacks that I've had, by not following my diet, and stress and things like that, that really put me back. But now I'm kind of going back to, doing all of those things plus more.
Okay, so I'd like to just go back for a second here because this is, I think, very important to
Hmm.
distinguish the differences. And I don't have a medical background. I'm just now reading all this stuff and getting into it, and a lot of our followers are too. But I think this is extremely important to understand. Somatic disease or metabolic disease. And so after the interview with Seyfried, I went on a witch hunt to look at the literature. Seyfried says that there's no literature to back up that cancer is a somatic disease. There's literally no actual literature to back it up. So I went out looking, and actually I couldn't find hardly any published studies. And the ones that I did find were I I'm not a scientist, but from what I could tell, quite weak. there wasn't really, there was references and things made in these studies, but they just seem pretty weak. There's a lot of claims on different, he had said the people at the top of the um cancer institutions that are putting these best practices and procedures and protocols. There's a name for it. Standard. What do you call it when you're a doctor? Standard.
Oh, you mean like just
Your
the
proto.
standard of care, or like
Yeah, standard of care. The
mhm,
people that are giving the doctors the standard of care, like these websites. Some of
mhm,
them say that cancer is a metabolic disease and a somatic disease.
mhm,
They say it's both, which is extremely confusing to me. And then I looked at, as Seyfried says, that him and many of his colleagues have published many articles showing that's a metabolic disease, proving it. And he also went on to state that there's many articles showing sugar. If you have increased glucose in your system, cancer grows faster. I fact checked that. Sure enough, there's many articles showing it. He even said like things like if you have an excess of lactic acid in your system, the
mhm.
Cori cycle occurs, and that will increase glucose in your system, and your cancer will grow faster. So if we could just go back for a second, Dr. Nee, and really understand a somatic disease to the best of your ability, because you do have a science health background. You're a medical doctor.
Mhm.
Like cell
Mhm.
makeup and all that really doesn't have much meaning to us. But if cancer is a somatic disease, with which they're claiming it is, with very little evidence, can you just reiterate what that means in simplest terms as possible?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the somatic theory just means that they think it's the genes, mutations in genes that cause cancer. And we do have some cancers, like the BRCA mutations, right? That where people can have increased risk of breast cancer. And there are definitely some identified genes that can cause cancer. However, it doesn't happen for everyone. So it's like, why does everyone that have the BRCA mutation, why don't they all develop cancer, right? So it doesn't explain it. It's just it is a possibility that that gene can cause the cancer, but you need the right environment too. So that's where it lacks, right? Because if it was 100%, then everybody would.
Oh no, we lost her. She should be right back. Oh, I think I got her here. Oh, we lost you.
I don't know how that
You're
happened.
back. You're back.
I'm
You were
back.
just explaining.
Yeah.
So I'll pick that right back up. So you're explaining it's the genes, and it
Yep.
doesn't explain it. And so let me clarify that too, because I was going to question that. When you say genes, do you mean DNA, like the DNA
Yes.
of the human?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
so what you're explaining, exactly where you were, was that it doesn't explain it, because why is it that some people with this missing link basically in their DNA get the cancer and other people don't? Was
Yeah.
exactly where you left off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because not
Like,
everybody that has the mutation, end up developing cancer, and so we have a lot of DNA mutations and things like that. But yeah, only a certain subset of people will develop it. So that's the first downfall. I mean, secondarily, they tried to map out the human genome and found like 32,000 different genes and things like that. But then they realize that with epigenetics, that a lot of these will then, morph into other other types of genes. So it's not just coming. It's not as simple as that. So and you can change your environment to then change your epigenetics, and so it's very, very interesting that we're still um, focusing our cancer treatments on this idea that's really old, and we haven't advanced the treatments in more than 60 years to figure out anything new. So that to me is just kind of crazy, that we're still using chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, and that's the best that we can do in this many years of of being able to find something to help our cancer patients.
So then that leads us to the metabolic. Explain
Mhm.
what cancer being a metabolic disease means. Like, what does that actually mean? Like, Professor
Mhm.
Seyfried explains it at an extremely high level. He explains how cancer cells ferment, and we compared it to wine in our last
Yeah.
video. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But
Yep.
he compared it to wine in our last video. Can you
Mhm.
maybe get
Mhm.
into little details on that instead? Like what does it mean to have a metabolic disease? Like how do you explain that and visualize that? Because you can probably explain it so we can all understand it in better terms.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, so metabolic disease, when I think about it, is that it's like the different pathways that the cancer cells will utilize, right? So when we get sick and when we develop cancer, something happens, in and again, it goes back to developing it in the DNA. Like specifically for my type of cancer, I have a mutation, where there's like a translocation between two different chromosomes that fuse together and cause an unbalanced translocation, they call it. And then that will then wreak havoc and create all of these downstream things to happen. And what causes that, they don't know. It's like it just happened. And it's like it's not, inherited. It's so if it's not inherited, then it has to be something in the environment that caused this whole process to happen. So we have cells in our bodies and our immune system and all of the processes. I mean, every day, every second, we have to attack these cells that are we have to kill off these cells that are not behaving normally. So cancer is really like our own cells. It's not like a foreign thing. It's just that when the cells don't behave in the normal way that the other cells are supposed to behave. So there's hallmarks of cancer, and they describe it. There's like 10 hallmarks of cancer. Like it's I can't remember them all, but some of it is like its ability to evade the immune system, its ability to spread and metastasize. It's developing like abnormal blood vessel growth, to feed it, utilizing different pathways to feed it, and it kind of goes back to uh, almost like how parasites behave, where they use glucose through the fermentation process, which you mentioned, because we have the normal function of the mitochondria where we have the oxygen and all that, but the cancer cells, they kind of switch into a different pathway for whatever reason, and that's the Warburg effect that he discovered. And and then they use this fermentation pathway in order to burn the glucose. But this process is very inefficient and it's very messy. So it's like when it consumes the glucose in that way, it leads to a lot of like lactic acid buildup, and then there's the oxphos pathway, which is like kind of like the reverse Warburg effect. But these cancer cells, they just kind of behave very differently for whatever reason, and so that's kind of what the metabolic dysfunction is because it just the cell switches, and we think that it's because of all of the environmental things that happen. So stress, that can happen, can lead to mitochondrial dysfunction, and of course your ways of eating and lifestyle things. So all of these factors will then damage the mitochondria and cause your cells to change, and that's basically what metabolic theory is.
Okay, so the way I see metabolic dysfunction is basically a cell that for some reason is just acting differently, doesn't want oxygen anymore. And so it just wants glucose and glutamine. Now that's gonna lead us into maybe we could have a little debate on this because maybe not, maybe we can both agree. But every year, Professor Seyfried offers his students, and I've seen it in multiple videos, a crisp $100 bill to anybody that can find any proven scientific literature that cancer uses anything other than
Mhm.
glucose and glutamine. And then this is where a lot of people run into problems, and myself included. And I actually was negative on this whole metabolic theory and threw it out the window quite a few times, which was the wrong thing to do, because I go, well, I can get the glucose under control, but I still can't do anything about the glutamine. And I gave up on
Mhm.
myself and the metabolic theory and the cancer quite a few times because of that. I'm putting in all this work, and the cancer is just going to
Mhm.
thrive on this glutamine. But now I think I've now gotten to the point, and I beg of you to try to clarify or correct me if I'm wrong. But I think I'm at the point now where I get it. And what I get is that the actual energy source, which is oxygen in a normal cell, is no longer oxygen. Cancer is using the glucose. Done. That's its energy. The glutamine is what it's using. It's, yeah, maybe a little bit for energy, but it's using it for replication, DNA replication and RNA. It's using the uptake of glutamine basically for cell division. Is that the right term?
Mhm.
Cell division? So just basically to
Yeah.
copy itself so it can die off. Is that not correct? And so that's what the
Well,
glutamine uptake is for.
mhm.
Like, what is glutamine
Mhm.
maybe used for in a normal cell? Is it not used for that exact purpose to rebuild itself and replicate itself in cell division? Like, I'm not even sure. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, glutamine is an amino acid. So, when you think about the fuel sources, we have our glucose, which comes from carbohydrates. We have our amino acids, which is protein, right? And glutamine is one of the most widely available amino acid. It's like one of the most, prevalent that we have in our system. And there's like a bunch of other amino acids. And then we have fatty acids, which comes from fat. So, in response to what you said, and I'm not sure what Dr. Thomas Seyfried said about that because I haven't heard him say that there's nothing else besides glucose and glutamine. I'm not sure, but based on what Jane McLellan and her book and her study, how to starve cancer, she talks about the three pathways that cancer cells will utilize, and that includes fatty acids. So there's glucose, there's amino acids like glutamine, that's the biggest one, and then there's fatty acids. For sarcomas, we also utilize arginine, which is another amino acid as well. It's hard to know how to block that as well. The amino acids are tricky because it's essential, right? Like we need it to have other functions in our system. Like glutamine is really important for the gut and so many other things. So you can't just block it. You can't just like take it away like you do with glucose. It's much harder to do that, and we don't really know what the side effects can be and how to block it, when to block it, how to pulse it. So I know Dr. Thomas Seyfried is working on that, and he's using Dawn, and so he's experimenting with it. There are other natural ways of blocking glutamine, like green tea extract and curcumin and fenbendazole, mebendazole, the drugs that we're on, exercise, fasting, things like that, right, to lower the glutamine. So there are other things that you can do for that. She does talk about how cancer will so if you block one pathway, it'll go around it and it will feed on something else. And different types of cancers will feed off of different fuel source. So, for example, glioblastoma or like brain cancers, they tend to feed off a lot more of the glucose, which is why ketogenic and carnivore, I think, works really well for that. There are other types of cancers like melanoma, pancreatic cancer that feed off of fat, fatty acids. And so it's important to research your own type of cancer so that you can see what pathways to block. But she thinks that you need to block all three, which is why some of the repurposed drugs that they use is like statin drugs, right? That blocks the melavonic acid pathway, and some of the other fatty acid synthesis pathways. And then there's metformin, which blocks the GLUT receptors and things like that. And then, and then you have other drugs like the antiparasitics. I mean, there's so many, but there's something called the care oncology clinic where they started doing research on that, and they have four drugs that they use, which is doxycycline, metformin, atorvastatin, and mebendazole. So these four drugs kind of comprehensively block all of those pathways. So in regards to your, I forget what your question was. I think you were just saying about the glutamine, right? Like whether like how that works, basically.
No, you're
Yeah.
right on it.
Yeah. Hmm.
The glutamine is a big problem for a lot of people. It's a big problem for me. It's a big problem to understand.
Yeah.
But I'm at the point where I don't think in listening to Seyfried. So you said you're not sure where he says this. So Jeff the Prosperous from
Yeah.
Blessings on My Journey did an interview
Hmm.
with Professor Seyfried, and in there he clearly states that there's only two, and he's had it for
Interesting.
30 years. If anybody can show any scientific evidence in the literature, he said there's lots of claims of these other amino acids, but he said there's not one piece of scientific evidence in any piece of literature. He offers his students $100 bill every single year if they can find one, if they come across one, and he says it doesn't exist. There's the only two.
Is he saying like referring like other amino acids, or has he talked about fat, the fatty
He
acid?
says he clearly states in that video, because it was actually my
Okay.
question to Jeff, because he's my buddy, to specifically
Uh-huh.
ask
Uh-huh.
Professor Seyfried. I said, "What else can cancer use other than glutamine and glucose?" I
Gotcha.
know there's these other
Yeah.
claims, and it was
Yeah.
very clear, and he very clearly answered it and said, "Nope, nothing. There is nothing else. It is literally glucose and glutamine. There is nothing else that
Okay.
cancer cells can
Well, I mean,
use." And
yeah, I'll watch that video. Yeah, so I'll watch that video, but like definitely,
but
if you read
that
Jane's
doesn't
book,
mean
yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that he's correct, right? And what I would like, maybe what we could do is take Jane's book and find out her reference. Like, where is she referencing this from? Where's that
Well,
piece of scientific literature
I mean,
showing
she
it?
definitely, yeah, she definitely follows Dr. Thomas Seyfried. So she's
Yeah.
in the same realm. I mean, they all know each other. And there's only a subset of people who are doing all this metabolic therapy. And she definitely knows Dr. Thomas Seyfried. So maybe it's just like a clarification. I mean, I would love to ask him about the fatty acid part, but yeah, I mean, to
Me
me,
too.
it made sense in what she was saying about, all the research. And even when you research it, and I've looked up, on PubMed and things like that, and I have seen that cancer utilizes other pathways like, the fatty synthesis pathways, not just glutamine and glucose.
So on PubMed, so that would be published peer-reviewed papers. So that would
Hmm.
be legitimate.
Yeah,
But yeah, Seafried
yeah,
says no. It's just he says there isn't any real evidence. Like, and I don't know what that means. So I'd like to know more about that. And in any case,
yeah,
if you take glucose out, that's the energy source of the cell.
yeah, yeah.
Glutamine's
Well,
used for replication.
Yeah, glucose is just gonna be the main thing because pretty much every
Right.
cancer, like every cancer is start, and especially it starts off with that. So these other pathways that they, will go around usually happens if you block it, or if your cancer is more advanced. So if you have early stage cancer, I mean, most of the time just blocking glucose is enough. But I think once it gets more advanced, and as Jane says, then you have to really just like combine a lot of things to really beat it. So that's where it becomes difficult, is that when once it gets more advanced and more time passes, the cancer cells are very smart.
Okay, so to reiterate all this, and then we can move on. But where
Hmm.
I'm at, and is the way I'm seeing this, is we block the glucose through the GKI, and everybody should actually have a different diet. It's not like carnivore fits all. It's not like keto fits all, Mediterranean fits all. You got your weight to take into consideration. You don't want to work out too much because you don't want any lactic acid buildup, because you get the Cori cycle, which creates glucose spikes. But you need to have some healthy exercise to reduce glutamine. But basically, you want to get your GKI as low as possible. And whatever diet that is, whatever foods you eat, you should be
Hmm.
testing frequently, or have a glucose monitor is actually a fabulous idea, which I'm now looking into. And you really want to focus on GKI. Get your GKI as low as you can. And then in terms of blocking glutamine, Well, you can't really block it fully, but you got fembendazole, you got embendazole, you have things that you can do, but don't get caught up on the glutamine as much because it's not the main fuel source of the cell. It's being used to replicate itself. But if it's really like it, don't get caught up on it. Don't get negative about it. Use the tools you have. Berberine can lower glucose as well. That's just a natural substance.
Mhm.
To curcumin or whatever it's called. Maybe have some of that. What other
Mhm.
stuff can you use to lower glucose and glutamine or that you're aware of? CBD oil. What else, Doctor Nee?
I mean, glucose. Yeah, I definitely take berberine. I'm just thinking of what specifically lowers glucose. I mean, they all have different pathways that they work on, and I tend to pick the supplements that kind of have more than one effect, And berberine actually is like anti-parasitic, and I mean has a lot
Oh,
more
wow.
properties than just yeah. So it's like you want to pick the really powerful ones like boosting effects because the immune system is a huge part for cancer. So I can't think of anything else that's like specifically would lower glucose, but I know that and mebendazole, it what it does is it prevents the cancer's ability to take in glucose, and some of that has to do with the receptors, because the cancer cells they will upregulate the receptors on the surface that will, like the GLUT1, GLUT4 receptors that will then actually allow it to take in more glucose. So some of the drugs and supplements are working on the receptors itself.
Okay. Okay. So what is the glutamine? Is it used for energy or is it used for replication? Like what's your opinion on that? Where do you stand?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's an amino acid, so it's basically a building block. So it is used, more for the cancer cells to thrive and survive in building the DNA because that's what protein is. That's what amino acids are. So they'll use that in order to replicate and build.
So the basically the glutamine's the chainsaw and
Hmm.
and the glucose is the fire itself.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's
Fair enough.
the a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah, essentially, it's like the amino acids are the building blocks, and then yeah, the glucose tends to be a fuel source. Yeah.
And so what's the most I guess glucose is the most important thing to block then. Takes away the energy. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I
That's
think
interesting.
that's because yeah, because you also have, I mean, you have fast dividing cells and then you have cancer stem cells, right? So you have to target both of them. I mean, so that's the issue with conventional treatment is because they're only targeting fast dividing cells. That's what chemotherapy and radiation does. It just wipes it out, but then you have this small percentage of cancer stem cells that stay alive, and these are the ones that you really have to worry about because they're the ones that are very smart, and they will mutate and they will do whatever it is to stay alive, and then they will replicate, and then you end up having resistance, right, to chemotherapy. That's why it stops working. That's why you have resistance to drugs in general. So, when you get chemotherapy, there it's like everything shrinks. Okay, great, but you're not targeting the cancer stem cells, so you still have cancer in your body, and this can just come back at any point in time. That's why you have recurrence, and when you have recurrence, it's way, way, way more difficult to treat, and that's how people usually die. So you have to target these cancer stem cells, utilizing all of those repurposed drugs and supplements that that Jane talks about in her book, and target that area of it. So that's what I've actually been doing, instead of just focusing on the fast dividing stuff because that's really not as important. But yeah, when you take away glucose, you're basically trying to starve the cancer cells so that they get weaker, and then it's easier to just boom, like kill them. So it's like that kill phase, where you're pulsing it, based on what Dr. Thomas Seyfried talks about, and what Jane talks about.
Well, this stem cell thing is fascinating to me actually, because I've never
Mhm.
heard anybody speak
Yep.
of it, and I didn't read Jane's book. Maybe I need to. Hopefully, she has an audio version because I'm not a very good reader. But this stem cell thing. So, is this why they do stem cell transplants with some cancer patients?
That I mean, that's a little bit different because that's more like with blood cancers and stuff where they do like bone marrow transplants. So that's not, but they do have some newer therapies where they will take out the cell and, and there's like mRNA vaccines that they're doing. They have like CAR T cell therapies and, a lot of more focused where they actually take out the T cells. And then they will basically change it and then they put it back into your own system so that it can detect the cancer and fight it off. So that's a little bit different, than what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
But the cancer stem cells are just they're like the originator, right? And that's what you have, and they can morph into many things. And that's actually one of the really great things about fasting is that fasting really targets the cancer stem cells in autophagy, which is like basically a process where it induces like it's like when you clean house, when you take out the garbage, because when you're constantly eating, you just don't have your body doesn't go into that deep cleaning process where they take out all of the bad cells and just fix all of those dysfunctions. And so fasting, I think after 3 days is when you really go into autophagy and you really are able to clean house and get rid of all of those old dead cells, the ones that are not functioning properly, the ones that refuse to die. That's like apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So cancer tends to evade that whole process. And so they just keep living and living and living, despite taking out everything with them around the area. So,
Well, that's amazing. So, fasting. A lot of
mhm.
cancer patients, myself and you, and talked to somebody the other day from Australia. Uh, Talked to another individual the other day in Quebec. People are reaching out left, right, and center, and they don't have the weight to fast. They're dropping 8 pounds a week or whatever. They're
Yeah.
down to 120 pounds, like my case or you. Like we don't have the
Mhm.
weight to
Mhm.
do 3, 5, 10-day fasts. So what I've learned is that when fasting, animal fat
Yep.
is allowed. So you can
Yep.
take in animal fat because the autopathy, myopathy, all of this stuff is you're the
Mhm.
pro and creating these ketones is just simply the process of the body burning fat.
Yep.
And whether
Yep.
the body's getting the fat orally or from the physical body itself, the full benefits of fasting occur. Is there any truth to this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's like fast mimicking diets, and then you definitely because it's really just like really lowering the your TKI like you said, and with the ketones. And I think when it comes to fasting with all of those benefits that you get from it, I'm not sure about. I mean, I know the benefits for cancer in general, with like if you want to do some bone broth with butter and stuff, like I feel like that would be helpful. I'm not so sure about like the whole benefits of fasting if you do incorporate some of the calories in there, So that I don't know much about, so I don't want to speak on it. But I myself have done a lot of fasting, especially last year. I did, longest I did was a 7 day water only fast, and I've done a bunch of 3 day ones, 5 day ones. I did also other things like eat only grapes for 40 days, which I found from the book called The Grape Cure, where this woman cured her. She actually had stomach cancer, so so I wonder if that would be helpful for your esophageal cancer. But she has stomach cancer, and I think she tried. I mean, she fasted so much that she fasted until she was like bones.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
here. You dropped from
oh,
stage, but we're still on. We're still good.
okay.
You were just
Yeah,
saying
no,
she was
yeah.
like bone. She fasted so much.
Yeah, I was talking. Yeah, so this was like in the 1940s or something, and she didn't know what to do. So they told her she had like weeks to live, so she just kept fasting. That she would do like 30-day fasts, like crazy. And she was a small woman, so she was fasting to like skin and bones, and it would keep the cancer from growing. But every time she would refeed, where she would eat again, it would just progress again, and so then she would just keep going on this cycle until she
Mm,
discovered grapes, and she ended up just eating grapes only, and apparently it had all these healing properties. And um, so like it has like resveratrol in there, and she mentioned like three different things that it does, but it kind of like repaired her gut lining and all of that, and her it helped like basically just make her better in terms of the stomach cancer without losing all that weight. And so she ate
mm,
grapes, I think, only for 6 weeks or so, and she started to heal, and she basically beat stomach cancer. The tumor was eating through her stomach, where it was like pretty much it was going to cut in half, and the tumor just shrank, and she went on to live. So I thought that was an incredible story. So I wanted to try the grape cure. And I think my experience with fasting is, I definitely think it helps while you're fasting. But the problem is when you eat again. So that's what I had trouble with. I would lose a ton of weight on it. And like you said, I don't have much weight to lose. So I think that some of that might have had negative effects on me. But while I fasted, I noticed that all my pain would go away. I would have no tumor pain. Like everything was like super calm. And I think if I refed myself the right way, it would have been a lot more beneficial. But I was at that point where I would just want to like eat everything when I stopped fasting, and I would feed myself like junk. And that was definitely a
mm,
mistake. And I just couldn't control myself. I was so hungry and I wanted to eat all these carbs. And so every time I refed myself, I think it just kind of went down the wrong way. So eventually, once I'm able to put back on weight and I can do fasting more safely, and I might try what you're gonna do with the bone broth and butter. But I think at this time, my body just needs to rebuild before I can really do more fasting. And I try to do more of the intermittent fasting, where I'll eat within a 6 to 8 hour window, and that does help to lower my GKI and stuff. So.
and that's the most important thing, and everybody's gotta listen to their body. I think that's a huge thing that you just said, is we all have to listen to our body,
Hmm.
because if your body's saying you need time to recuperate, then you need to allow it that time, and if you need time to put on the weight, then you need to allow it that time.
Yep.
Um, you really have to be in tune with yourself while fighting cancer. You could just take the standard care medicine, but if you want to really do a good job and long-term preventative maintenance and make sure you don't have reoccurrence, and if you really want to beat that cancer, I think you really become a self experiment. You got to try things, to
Yep.
put things in, take things out. And so you
Mhm.
tried the grapes, which is absolutely fantastic. And so you had really good benefits, you said, while doing it, but then afterwards, was it afterwards
Well,
that you were eating like
yeah.
crazy, or is that just yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so with the grape one, so at that time I had a tumor growing in my skull, and it was the only one that was growing, because after everything that I was doing, like I was on, I was like strict. I did more of a vegan diet actually in the beginning. I did that for 3 months, like strictly vegan, no dairy, nothing processed, no sugars at all. So literally, I ate giant salads, nuts and seeds, and like my dressing would be like olive oil and like some seasoning in it. And I juiced as well. I did juicing. So that's what I did initially, for about 3 months. After that, I added back in some fish, and seafood, with keeping that same diet. And I did this for like almost 2 years, and it worked for me. I mean, like I was very crazy and gung ho because I was starting out. I was like going in strong, and I meditated every day for like almost like 2 hours. I did yoga. I did energy healing. I went to acupuncture. It was like every day was like a whole list of things that I would do. And I was, and I exercised a lot at the time. I went hiking. I was grounding. I took, supplements and herbs, and I mean, you name it, I did it. And I did it all within that time. And I don't know what worked, but something worked because all of my lung tumors were shrinking for the first time ever, and they actually all disappeared. They never came back. I still have like I think one. Yeah, so I got rid of those lung meds, which is great. And then the bone metastasis also healed. I had like a really bad one in my sacrum and my lumbar spine that was just eating through. And I remember they just stopped growing, and my bone mets in those areas are still pretty much not they're fine, to this day, and they're all under control. But I had this one tumor in my skull that just was not behaving. It was in my skull bone, and it was just pressing on my hypoglossal nerve. So my tongue got deviated, and it's like still paralyzed to this day. And I had recent brain surgery to remove that because it was still the only non behaving tumor. And I don't know if this has to do with crossing the blood brain barrier or what it is, but it was just really weird. So when I did the 40-day grape diet, that was kind of what I was targeting. Like I wanted to get rid of that tumor because at the time I was doing so well and everything else was working. So actually after that, it I had stable scans for the first time where it didn't grow because it was growing steadily. And then after the grape diet, it stopped growing. And that actually led my oncologist to say, oh, wow, now you can get off treatment. So she pretty much took me off of all treatments because she thought I was like healed basically. And that was the only one that we were watching that I remained on treatment for. And so when it stopped growing, she took me off of everything. And then after that, I just kind of went downhill because it was another move, and I was tired of my diet. I was tired of doing everything, and I had more stress from changing jobs and moving. And so I kind of just neglected my health. And that's when things again were starting to pick up. So yeah, you can't let down your guard ever. Like if you are going to do this, it's going to be lifetime. Like you have to just accept it. And that's where I'm at right now. Like I have to just accept that this is going to be my life, and I'm going to have to eat clean. I'm going to have to take care of my body, take care of my mental health. If I want to live and if I don't want any more setbacks, then this is what I'm going to have to do, and I'm just going to have to embrace it.
And the things that you're doing right now, what's your diet look like, and like what kind of exercise you're doing? Like we talk all the time, so I know some of these
Yeah.
answers, but
Yeah.
like what
Yeah.
and what's your regiment like, and like what have you done? Is there anything else that you've done in the past that you thought you yielded extreme benefit that's kind of neat other than the grape fast?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think the meditation part, yeah, because I did a lot of Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, where he, basically what he talks about is like when you go into a deep meditative state, you're slowing down your brain waves, and so you get into, the slow brain waves where you're a lot more suggestible. It's almost like hypnosis. And so you can actually kind of talk to yourself, and work with your subconscious mind, because we have the subconscious, which is like controls 95% of everything we do. And then we have the 5% where we actually know what we're thinking and talking about. I mean, we have like 80,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of those are negative. So it's like almost like becoming aware of your thoughts and working with your subconscious mind in order to heal these traumas and these things that are programming you. It's almost like you go into this like automatic state. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you get out of bed on the same side. Like you have these programs that are already set. Like you're driving, you're not thinking about these things. And so what the meditations do in his work, is basically becoming so aware of everything that you're doing, your thoughts and your processes. And it's almost like changing yourself because when you have cancer, it's like, this is me, I have cancer, right? And that's your program. So, in order to change that, where you're like, I don't have cancer, I'm a healthy person, you have to change yourself. It's like you have to change your whole personality and your environment. And I mean, that's why I think stress is so hard because people have environments that they live in, right? They have their partners, they have their problems, and they can't get away from that. And they're just stuck in that situation. And I think that's what prevents people from healing because it's just this replayed program. So you really have to work on that to change yourself in order to be a different person. And so when I was really focusing on that type of work, I think that was a really big key part of my healing, and I have not been doing that as much recently, which I want to get back to. But nowadays, my diet is a little bit different because I'm no longer vegan. I don't think that I can sustain myself on a plant-based diet. I can't, like, it just doesn't work for me because I can't sustain it. It's that simple. So I do eat a lot of clean meats, mostly like the ruminant meats from beef and lamb. I don't really eat pork or chicken or seafood. So I kind of stick with those ruminant meats, clean meats, all organic and grass fed. I do eat some butter, but I definitely stay away from dairy because I'm lactose intolerant and it's inflammatory. And for cancers in general, it does, like, increase your IGF-1 and the growth factors and stuff. So I don't do that. I do eat some vegetables and very, very little fruit because of the sugar. So I don't eat any bread or rice or pasta, like none of those refined carbohydrates or sugar at all. I don't really juice anymore, but I'm thinking of kind of making like a little immune shot, like with ginger, turmeric, and stuff like that, and only have that lemon, and then I take a bunch of supplements, and I've recently started on some repurposed drugs based on that whole metro map that Jane talks about, just to target different pathways. I'm taking mebendazole, niclosamide, which is like another anti-parasitic, and it blocks a lot of pathways with that one. And
What's that
and
one
I
called
I
again?
picked
Say that
these.
again. S say that
Oh,
again.
niclosamide,
Nicl Niclosamide.
yeah,
Interesting, I haven't heard of that
niclosamide.
one before.
Yeah, it's similar. It's another anti-parasitic, and then but it targets a lot of pathways, and it also targets cancer stem cells, and it does work on glutamine as well. So so I picked these drugs specifically for my cancer type, but that one is like it blocks the WNT pathway, which most cancers have, and I'm going to make like a whole video on this. I just have been trying to put it together. It's a lot of information. And then I also take ivermectin, and I pulse it. I pulse it 3 days on with all those drugs, and then 4 days off. I take low dose naltrexone. I do
What's
mistletoe
naltrexone?
injections. Low dose
What's
naltrexone,
naltrexone?
yeah. Yeah, naltrexone is normally it's used for people who have addiction to alcohol, actually, and so they use it in higher doses for that, but they found that it works really well on other chronic diseases, like especially autoimmune stuff like fibromyalgia, and it helps with pain. It regulates the immune system. There's a lot of benefits to low dose naltrexone, but uh, yeah, so that's why I take that. That was recommended to me by my naturopath a while back. I just wasn't consistent with it, but now I'm consistent with it. And then same with mistletoe. Mistletoe is like another very powerful immune type of alternative treatment. So those are the main off-label stuff that I use. And then of course I have my supplements. I take what most people take, like vitamin D and fish oil and curcumin. I take the green tea extract. I just started melatonin. Oh, and I forgot that I do also take aspirin and Claritin, which are off some repurposed drugs as well that works on the cancer stem cells, and the aspirin does, and then the loratadine, which is Claritin, it helps with the immune system to kind of reverse your T cell, like you have your T helper cells, like Th1, Th2, so it kind of flips the process and helps immunotherapy work better. So that's why I chose that one specifically. But yeah, I have to kind of like sit down and like write all this stuff out and make a video about it. So from the top of my head, it's like I can't remember exactly all the mechanisms, like, but yeah, but there's a rhyme and reason to why I chose these specific supplements and drugs.
Have you heard of ingestible methylene blue?
Yeah, I have. I don't know much about it though. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
have heard
something
of
new that I've learned. It's apparently boosts your
it.
immune system. It's an anti-parasitic benefits and
Yep, yep,
viral benefits. Apparently, there's a lot of benefits to ingesting
yeah,
methylene blue. So
yeah.
I don't know. I was
No,
curious if
I
you
mean,
heard about it.
yeah, I mean, there's so many, there's so many things, and it's like on my channel, my subscribers will like just mention this and mention that, and they've all been things that I've heard of and researched at some point, but I think when it comes to picking your protocol, like you have to just really like, I mean, you research it and then you pick the ones that kind of intuitively come to you. Like I use my intuition a lot when it comes to all of this. And it's like, it'll be something I see. I'm like, oh, and then there'll be mention of sarcoma or something. And then I add it. So you can't do everything. You just can't. There's so many things. So I think the best way is to just keep it simple at first and just keep adding to your protocol as you go along. But just don't overwhelm yourself with way, way, way too much.
That's definitely great advice. That's
Yeah.
definitely great advice.
hmm Yeah. Because you'll just get,
So yeah, I think that looks pretty good. We reiterated some of the stuff from Professor Seyfried, which was quite complicated, and then we got some really good ideas from you on things that we can do in your protocol and the Great Fast. I think this has been quite informative and quite an amazing day. I really thank you for going through all this stuff with us. And you got take some time here to put in anything last minute closing thoughts. And if everybody can hop over to Dr. Nee's channel and subscribe, help her out. She has a lot of awesome videos on there, and she records her journey as she goes along and as things comes up. She's really good at updating her channel. She's quite awesome. But Dr. Nee, anything you'd like to add, or any closing thoughts or feelings or anything?
no, I mean, I agree. This has been like such a good talk. And, I really hope that it helps people, just to see what we're going through and what we're doing. And everybody's just individualized. And I think both of our purposes and our goals for having our channels is just to inspire other people to do the same, and we all have to just take care of ourselves. And when we're dealing with something like cancer, it's just great to have such a good community and support. And so, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today too. I really hope you guys enjoyed this and got something out of it. I know I learned quite a bit from Dr. Nee. And again, just please, I'll put a link to her channel in the description. Everybody, please just hop over and give her a subscribe just to help her out so she can keep growing and get some cancer messages out there. And she's learning and growing like the rest of us. And she's actually got the courage to stand up and let everybody know what's working. So that's quite amazing and commendable. So thank you very much, Dr. Nee. We
Okay, thank you,
appreciate it.
Jason. Okay.
All right, everybody. Have a good day now. Bye.